So dignity and dreams, and that's what we're going to talk about, luckily. Some of you know me and wonder what I'm doing outside of my Qantas pajamas, but this time my luggage did come through, so I'm happy to be with you again. Now, if you're an economic sociologist in the United States and this quote comes up, you're going to know who said it. I'll just read it to you. Multiple monies matter. They are powerful. Oh, by the way, this is going to be an optimistic talk. However, because I'm a poverty scholar, it's going to have a real downer at the end. So, I don't want to destroy my reputation. Multiple monies matter. They are powerful, visible symbols of particular types of social relations and meanings. But they are more than that. They directly affect social practices. People not only think or feel differently about their various monies, but they spend them, save them, or give them for different purposes and to different people. Can anyone, Bruce is not allowed to answer this question, but can anyone? Viviana Zelizer, very good. A former colleague of Bruce's at Princeton. Okay, I don't know how well you can see this, but these are cash assistance expenditures in the United States. We have a big population, so you're going to see some big numbers up there. But what I want to point out to you are just a couple of things, okay? This is our welfare system. Currently, we're spending about $17 billion on welfare. Only about 5 or more, probably more precisely, 4.5 billion of those dollars are going into the pockets of families. The rest, states are diverting from their block grants for other purposes. Okay? Over here is something that most people, even in the United States, have never heard of. It's called the Earned Income Tax Credit. You see that number up there, 54 billion. That's the money that's actually going into the pockets of poor and near poor families. But if you add the lost tax revenue, because this is a refundable tax credit, it's about $64 billion for 2012 and about 68 or 69 billion projected for 2013. Okay? Now, if you listen to the political debates in America, if you listen to the debates in the election, everybody's talking about that 4.5 billion, as if there are a lot of people on the rolls. At welfare's height, about 5% of Americans were receiving some form of welfare. Can anyone guess what percent are receiving welfare today? No guesses? No brave people? 54%? Well, that's what you would think, given the election rhetoric. The answer is 1.4%. Or 1.1 million Americans on the rolls. By contrast, 25 million folks are receiving cash benefits from this program. And yet, if you ask your average American, they think this is a huge problem and they don't know this exists. Okay? So this is just a table of trends over time. Because it's so light in here, you're not going to be able to see it, but it just shows what I basically told you. The participation rate of traditional cash welfare has plummeted over time from about 5.1 billion adults to about 1.1 billion adults. This is even true during the Great Recession. That's what we call it in the United States. I know you have a different name for it. We learned that in Canberra. But there was barely an uptick at all in welfare participation in the face of the Great Recession in America. All right. So I'm going to ask a peculiar set of questions about the EITC, this cash assistance program that I'm going to explain a bit more to you about in a minute. Do the meanings of this major cash assistance program, okay, and the more traditional cash welfare programs we've had in the past, which we call welfare, vary? Okay, are they different? And does this difference matter in terms of how they spend the money? Now, you may know that at the beginning of my career, I spent 6 years running around the country trying to figure out how low-income single mothers on welfare made ends meet. I tracked their incomes and expenditures ad nauseum. We had 400 cases. Laura Lane was my co-author on that project. So in some ways, I'm revisiting my past and contrasting those experiences with the sea change in American welfare policy that, again, nobody knows about, is massive. And I'm going to look at how people spend money now and contrast it with how they talked about and spent their money in the past. Okay? But I'm also going to ask a more, I think, fundamental, a sort of welfare state question for those of you who are fans of the welfare state literature. And that is, has the move, and there has been a profound move in the United States, from a need-based entitlement, okay, which we wiped out in 1996, right? Welfare reform. Has the move from this need-based entitlement to a work-based safety net, because you can't get the EITC unless you work. It's like a conditional cash transfer. You have to engage in a certain behavior to claim a benefit. Even if you're totally needy, you can't get 1 red cent from the EITC unless you work, and work a substantial amount. Has that shift transformed the nature of the welfare state and the meaning of cash assistance for the poor and the near poor? Okay. Now, I'm not the first person to talk about this, or Zelizer is not the only person to talk about the special meanings of money. It's also coming from behavioral economics, most notably Thaler. Most of this literature is around how people spend windfalls differently than regular income. This is relevant to the case of the EITC because the EITC comes with your tax refund once a year at tax time. You used to be able to claim it month to month, but almost no one took up that option, and we can talk about why that is in a bit. But it's a once a year lump sum at tax time. If you add all the tax credits together, you're a single mom with 2 kids, you can be walking out of your H&R Block with a check for up to $8,000. So by U.S. standards, it's a lot of money, and a lot more than you could have ever claimed from welfare if you had no income. So this is a little bit more background about the windfall. I'm going to whiz through this, but we can come back to it. This is essentially the economics literature on special money. The sociological contribution, I think, has really gone beyond and sort of trumped I'm teasing, but not really, the economic literature, in that Zelizer argues that not only do the different forms money make a difference in expenditures, she argues that the social meaning of monies also matter. She writes about the difference between a gift, an entitlement, and compensation. So if you get $700 in child support, might you spend it differently from jackpot winnings? Or an inheritance from your beloved grandmother? So we have been hanging out with 200 EITC recipients in 2 cities. We first met them in 2007, and we followed them from the moment they got their tax refunds through the next 6 months to learn how they allocated the money. And I'll explain a little bit more about our study in a minute. But we asked them at baseline, when we met them at the tax office with our huge sandwich boards that said, make $10 for 2 minutes of your time. We were like the most popular people in the neighborhood with that offer. We asked them about their planned allocations. We did a short survey, and we collected contact information. And then we tracked actual allocations over time. But we also asked about how they sort of made ends meet financially during the rest of the year. So we really got a full year financial budget from each household. But beyond the dollars and cents, we asked them how they thought about spending. What do you think about this refund? How do you describe it? What does it mean to you as opposed to money from earnings or money from other government streams, such as welfare? Okay. We particularly looked at the differences between the EITC and the old need-based welfare system, AFDC, Aid to Families with Dependent Children. This is the program in the U.S. that was referred to as welfare. What remains of welfare we now call temporary, notice the word, temporary assistance to needy families. This is time-limited welfare. Hardly anybody's on it. It's basically a dead program. Okay. And what I'm going to draw on today is inductive analysis of open-ended responses to these questions about how folks allocate their money and how they think about their various kinds of money. And then I'll answer the question of whether it might make a difference. So I think we have a lot of evidence from these data that this is really thought of as a special income stream as distinct from other kinds of money. So one woman extols February, oh February. When February comes, I'll pay, my light bill. February, oh February. When February comes, I'll finally go to Walmart and buy my favorite pair of socks. And she goes on and on in this manner. Many people say, tax time is better than Christmas. And in fact, I was recently looking, I believe it was on the Walmart website, and they were advertising, because it was February, to come spend your refund here. And there's a little tagline, better than Christmas. So this has actually gotten onto the Walmart website. But people have been talking about this for years. We also have evidence that people are thinking about this money as special money because they tend to earmark it, or at least attempt to earmark it, in advance for specific purposes. Also note the language used to describe the tax refund. First of all, they call it a tax refund. Is it a refund? Not unless you intentionally overwithhold. Okay? It is a cash transfer from the government, but it comes in the same check as any money you have coming back because the government overwithheld your taxes, okay? So it's invisible. You can't tell it as distinct from the refund. I mean, we can, because we asked people to see their tax forms and we knew exactly where to look to see how much they got from the EITC versus other tax refunds. But the fact that they call it a refund and not a benefit, I think, is very significant. People say to me, well, do they know it's a transfer? And I'd say yes, but no. Everyone knows, or most everyone knows, that you get more than you pay in. Most people know that you get it because you have kids. If you're a single adult, you only get a few $100s. It's not a really big benefit. It's really targeted to families with kids. But they'll also tell you they earned it, right? And I think sort of the ambiguity that surrounds this form of cash assistance is really critical. It's also described as hitting the lottery. This reflects this large unexpected windfall. People are never quite sure, because the tax code is so complicated, how much money they might be getting. So there's this sort of hitting the lottery feeling that comes up again and again in the interviews. People describe it as found money, treat money, the kids' money. And this is very important, because the fact that they call it the kids' money reflects the fact that they know that they get it in part because they have children. And this seems to generate a special sense of stewardship over the money. And we're going to come back to that in a minute. Family money is another term termed, and savings. Savings. Okay, and as I'll reveal in a little bit, these families basically all have the aspiration to save, but almost the only savings that occurs throughout the year, because the EITC is really targeted to a single mom with 2 kids making between $13,000 and $17,000 a year. That's where the maximum credit goes. Or for a married couple, about $15,000 to $22,000 a year. Okay? So these are very low incomes, right? But they call it savings. And as you'll see, I'm going to at least argue that this has a real salience. So when we inductively coded the interviews for what meanings people were attaching, 3 themes were apparent. First, relief from financial pressure. Second, the EITC was a just reward for work. I earned it, I deserve it, I'm a worker, I'm playing by the rules, right? And the third meaning was, this is a vehicle, this is my chance for upward mobility, and this is the strongest theme of the data. And I'll come back to the little writing a little bit later on. Okay? So, a little bit of background. In the late 1980s, an Arkansas governor decided he wanted to be a different kind of Democrat. He didn't want to be viewed as a tax and spend liberal like Walter Mondale because he wanted to win the election. And there's evidence, actually, that he had a very deep commitment to ending welfare as we know it, and perhaps even to ensuring that most American of all themes, if you work, you shouldn't be poor. So he pledged in his campaign to end welfare as we know it. And in his first speech, which in the United States is a budget speech, he announced that in order to keep America's vow to its workers, if you work, you shouldn't be poor. You have to think back to Horatio Alger, right? This is part of the whole American project. What America thinks about itself is that hard work will be rewarded with prosperity. He was going to dramatically expand a tiny little tax credit that had been added kind of accidentally to the tax code in 1975. It was only worth about $400 when it was first added, and it was basically developed to compensate poor folks for the regressive taxes they had to pay. In fact, the expansions of the EITC in the 1980s were basically to compensate for gasoline taxes. Okay, so a tiny little program, but there it was. It was in the tax code. David Ellwood, my dean, was working for Clinton. He seized on the idea that you could make work pay through expanding this little tax credit dramatically, and indeed, he did. So, just as, and the reason that this was so important to Clinton and to Ellwood is that they wanted to reform welfare. So the addition of the EITC is part and parcel of welfare reform, right? They wanted to, welfare was a very, very unpopular program. It's actually always been unpopular in America. We talked a lot about it at the Canberra conference. How do we get people, the 5% of Australians who are dependent on government transfers, how do we get them off? We were having that same sort of conversation, but maybe with a different sort of edge in the late 1980s and the early 1990s. So there was a dramatic expansion of the EITC just as we ended welfare as we know it. Now, I want you to look at these pictures carefully. This is a neighborhood in Boston called East Boston. Can you see my little clicker? This is the old welfare office off of Maverick Street. Okay, it's 100 years old. It's covered with grime, wire mesh windows. This is a huge flagpole without a flag, and in big letters over the door, it says, "Overseers of the Public Welfare." This is like a Dickens novel. Can you imagine standing under that door, hat in hand, your neighbors all looking at you, with approbation, going to beg for help from the government. Now, 70% of claimants of the EITC go to H&R Block or one of its competitors to collect their EITC check. What happens when you walk into the H&R Block? I'll show you in a minute. I went there just a month ago so I could, be sort of fresh from the front lines of this revolution and report back to you. So a little bit about what the EITC is. It's based on earned income tax, and as you can see, and you'll see in a minute, it has a very long tail. So it peaks at between $13,000 and $17,000 a year of earnings. But the tail extends very, very long. So for folks at the bottom, it looks more like a universal than a targeted program. I'm going to argue that this is a really important feature of the credit. Okay, you get more when you have more kids. You get hardly any if you don't have any kids. And the maximum benefits are fairly large. This is just the earned income tax credit. You can get another $2,000 to $3,000 from the child tax credit, so add that mentally onto these amounts. But you can see that with 2 qualifying children, you're at about $5,000, and with 3 qualified children, you're close to $6,000 a year. This is more than the average total cash welfare benefit you could have claimed from the government if you had no outside income in most states under the old welfare system. So back in the day, before 1996, you had to choose between work and welfare. And my first book was really about that choice, that trade-off. Now, you can choose work and welfare, except no one calls it welfare, and that's actually very important. Okay, so this is the structure of the EITC. What's important about this chart, and what really, why economists, David Ellwood, Bill Clinton, liked it so much, is that if you're in this part of the wage distribution, the more you earn, the more you work. This is profoundly pro-work. There's quite a long plateau and then a gradual leveling off. Okay? So here's what happened with welfare, just to show you how welfare, meaning AFDC/TANF, how it's declined over time. 1.8 is the number of households, but those 1.8 households only have 1.1 adults because there are about 7.7 million child-only households on the rolls, and I can explain what that is in a minute. And here's what's happened with the EITC. Okay, so there is past research. Basically, let me summarize. We are the only study that I know of that's actually looked at the dollar-for-dollar allocations of the EITC that exists. So this, kind of justifies a smaller qualitative study. Other people have asked, did you spend any of your refund on X, any of your refund on Y, any of your refund on Z? But we actually looked at how much people spent in various categories and why. The best study of the EITC comes from Michael Barr and Lisa Doko. They have a book out about this that just came out. Suffice it to say that if we compare our results of categories of allocation, did you spend anything on X or Y or Z? If we code our data up in that way, it basically matches what Barr and Doko found in the Detroit area. And they also find, they asked a survey question about whether people preferred this lump sum over a more regular disbursement. And people said, yeah, and in fact, I'd like to withhold even more so my tax refund would be even bigger. And these are all low to moderate income households. So despite the fact that they're experiencing financial constraint, they really want this big lump sum refund. Okay, so we conducted the study in 2 sites, Boston, Champaign, Urbana. One is very high in living costs, one is relatively low. All of our families receive relatively large incomes, so most of them earned, the average earnings in our sample is about $21,000 a year. Our married couples were at about $27,000 a year. Our single mothers, single adults were at about $19,000 a year. And we stratified the sample. We collected this large survey sample at H&R Blocks. We also visited Head Start centers. And then we selected a subsample stratifying by race, ethnicity, and by marital status. We had equal representation of whites, blacks, Latinos. We did 2/3 single adults because that's what's on that's kind of the distribution of the EITC, and 1/3 marital couples within each of those racial and ethnic groups. And our method of tax preparation is roughly the same as what you see nationally. Not quite. We oversample people using a nonprofit preparer, but otherwise our numbers don't look too bad. Okay, so here is the big news for policymakers. This is the chart they care about. I don't think this is the most interesting thing, but it's going to play into our larger discussion. So most people thought that when we decided to give big checks to poor people, they would what? Big screen TVs, right? The lottery, go to Vegas. So this is how they actually spent the money. Oops, you'll see that 25% went to debt and bills. Unfortunately, most households can't actually make ends meet on $13,000 to $17,000 a year, or even $19,000 or $22,000 a year. So while the government is kind of saving their money, they are going into debt. And so they balance the books at tax time. Okay? We also have regular expenses. I'm not sure quite what to do with this, but families are really constrained economically, so sometimes they just pay the rent with less stress. Now, presumably there's some substitution there, and that frees up some money to go into these other categories, but this was This overloaded my brain cells to figure this all out. And people certainly couldn't figure out how to sort of talk about the substitution that occurred when they paid the rent with their EITC and how that freed up other monies for other things. So this is about the best we could do. Also, this category includes people who paid ahead on bills. This was very common for car insurance and rent. And people talked a lot about the financial relief this afforded. Okay? Treats, 11%. We're going to talk about this a lot. And I'm going to argue that this really is the just reward for work and how people talk about the EITC. I'll tell you a couple good stories about that. But this is the most heartening thing. So this is the high point. Okay, you should feel the happiest now you're going to feel during this talk. We've got 37%, almost 40% going into savings and asset and mobility spending. And when I say mobility, I mean buying a car so you can get a job in the suburbs, paying tuition. When I say assets, I mean durable goods, homes, and so forth. Okay, so this is kind of the policymaker's dream, right? So let's talk about relief from financial stress. And remember, 25% of the refund went to paying off bills. We're just going to go to the fun pictures. So this was my visit to the H&R Block in East Boston 1 month ago. We had just had 2 feet of snow, and we were about to get another foot. And you'll see here that this is a very aggressive marketing campaign. All over this street, there are these little like political campaign signs saying, "We're open." On the window, this is right before opening time. There's all kinds of interesting things. Get money in minutes. Okay? So the H&R Block, which is the largest tax preparer, and by the way, the largest part-time employer in America, right? Mostly built off EITC business. Liberty Tax, its main competitor, was basically built on EITC business. They're really advertising this financial relief theme. And here are the fee schedules. This is not a cheap thing. There's been only one really good study of how much people spend of their refund on tax preparation fees and rapid refunds. Alan Berube did it in DC. He estimates it's about 10%. I think that's a little high. But in our study, people said it was about 2.5%. But I think they were underestimating it because it's sort of invisible to you how much you pay. If you've gone through the H&R Block process, you may not realize it. So the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. But the theme of financial relief was mentioned spontaneously in 71% of the narratives, and 61%, to show you how desperately people needed this money at tax time, of those who filed at H&R Block took out one of these rapid refunds, which is a very, very, it's a loan for the time it takes for the IRS to get you that check. And it's got a very high interest rate. Usually, by the way, people who took out the rapid refund did so because they felt so pressed by bill collectors and creditors, they literally couldn't stand to let more time go by before they satisfied those debts. I can't quite see the top of that slide. The top of these slides are all cutting off. These families had a lot of debt, and we chronicle that in the paper. But significant debt payoff almost only occurred. It was almost exclusively done at tax time. Okay, so you'll see very high debt load among these folks. About half of that was old debt, like they got when they were young people, foolish people, like some of the people in this audience, who are taking out those student loans. Student loans were a common source of debt. I'm kidding about the foolish part, of course. But the other, about half of the debt had actually accumulated during the year while they were waiting for the refund. So Carla tells us, all I was thinking about was survival. All I was thinking about was, what do I need to do to save this family from eviction? And we were eligible for the Earned Income Tax Credit. I said, thank you, God. To be honest, I was so thankful that we were eligible because I knew that was going to keep us out of eviction court. So are these people poor? Yes. Lazan tells us, I paid 5 years worth of back property taxes with the refund. It was close to $4,000. Yes. Do you know how I felt after I paid them? I was like, oh my God, I felt so good. Because I said to myself, oh my God, if I wait any longer, we're not going to own the house anymore. They're going to take it from us. I felt like, oh my God, the more I wait, we're going to have a serious problem. Okay? Okay. And Sandra says, what would have happened without the refund? Or we asked her that. She says, oof, I'd have to go live down under the bridge. All right. So you get that part. These are financially constrained households, and they use that refund to balance their books and feel considerable psychological relief from doing so. But second, people see the EITC as a just reward for work. So what kind of jobs do these people have? Very ordinary jobs. Waitress, personal care attendant, stock person at Radio Shack, child care worker, and so on. Generally, they're earning between $8, $9, $9.50 an hour. And these jobs, in their words, have few intrinsic rewards. So when they talk about the rewards of working, and this is what the policy was intended to do, right? What Clinton wanted to do is get people off welfare and into work. There was a huge upsurge in the employment of single mothers as a response to the program. About 60% of that upsurge was due to the EITC, according to several fairly reliable economic estimates. Everybody says it was a big deal, right? But when they talk about rewards, the rewards of their jobs, they specifically link these to spending on treats. There's 11% of the refund that goes to treats, not debt, bills, or other things. So, for example, Claire Haynes says, I was able to buy the kids something that they were wanting. And this theme of satisfying kids' wants and not just their needs at tax time comes up over and over and over again. You know, I can't do that often. My daughter is like big into Dora. You guys have Dora the Explorer? Okay. My daughter is like big into Dora. Yeah, Dora is big in her life. So I was able to get her the little wooden Dora table and chairs. She sits there and eats dinner. And I actually did this interview, so I got to see this. It was very cute. Okay? Now, there's a strong sense of entitlement for the credit. Okay? Because folks are workers, they think that they deserve to be able to splurge at least a little bit, at least once in a while, on treat. And often they call it treats money or the kids' money. They also emphasize things they can enjoy as a family, and they use this term family money. Now, of course, treats come in two forms. Sometimes it's consumer goods, and other times it's experiences. Here, Claire again tells us, I can't see the very top of that, but you see that she's emphasizing want over needs. And she says it's what they need, but they may not like it. So this is sort of what she can get them with her regular income. So with this money, the EITC, I was able to take them to Target and let them pick their clothes. It might have been a couple of dollars more expensive, or it might have been even double the price. So she lets her kids loose at Target, which, as you know, is a kind of a low-priced clothing store. Not quite Woolworths, but I'm not sure. Do you have Target here? Okay. But the point was that they got what they needed, and at the same time, they felt like $1 million. And this theme is also very evident in the narratives, because they actually got what they wanted. My kids felt like $1 million. Okay. Now I have to tell you a little story about one of our respondents. She had a 9-year-old daughter who was not doing well in school. And she knew tax time was coming, and tax time came right about the time of her daughter's birthday. So she said to her daughter, honey, if you get through your midterms, I'm going to take you, and she knew her daughter loved seafood. I'm going to take you to the best seafood restaurant in America. So the daughter does well in school, as she was supposed to. And the family gets ready to make the trek to the best seafood restaurant in America. Now, you may think that because this mother lives in Boston, there would be many good seafood restaurants locally for her to choose from. But as it turns out, the best seafood restaurant in America is not in Boston. In fact, it's in Connecticut. And that is because the best seafood restaurant in America is Red Lobster. So this family rented a car, got 4 other family members who also got in a car, went to Connecticut, about 3.5 hours away, rented a hotel room, and went to Red Lobster. And this was the highlight of this family's year. So listen to what Maureen Ellis says about it. For her birthday, we went to Red Lobster. The hotel was $140. I mean, this family has no money, okay? The Red Lobster bill, there were so many of us, we spent over $500 in Red Lobster, but the only price I knew about is that my 9-year-old spent $68 for her meal and ate every bit of it. So Claire and her family spent about, paid for about half of that, plus the gas, plus the hotel. And this is what they chose to do with the treats portion of their EITC. One more slightly less extreme example comes from Lisa Benson, who took her daughter out to TGI Fridays and Uno as little special treats at tax time. These are 2 restaurants you probably have here too. They're kind of family restaurants. They wanted to experience something they didn't get to do as a mother-daughter thing on a regular basis. And Mark Clark, and I think this is a head of a married couple, makes a statement here that's really revealing. He says, sometimes I need a pair of sneakers or something and I don't got the $80. But at tax time, I go buy myself something nice. I mean, we're not poverty-stricken. Now, so here he's sort of saying, hey, I'm a worker. I'm not poverty-stricken. I have a right to get myself something nice. Okay. So Erica sort of explains how this would not be possible in most months. And Karen says the same. I'd spend it all if it came on a monthly basis, but this forced savings allows me to do something really special, something for me. Me money was a phrase some folks used for that modest expenditure. All right. What about this third theme of mobility? Almost everybody in the sample aspired to mobility. Getting ahead without prompting, half linked their aspirations to getting ahead to the refund directly, okay? They aspired to 2 things with regularity, owning homes and saving for their college tuition. Some folks also aspired to saving for their own educations, their further educations. I should say that if you really talk to families about their dreams, everybody wanted to go to Disneyland. This was like the pinnacle of family ambition. Disney came up in the majority of interviews spontaneously. Good parents take their kids to Disney. This is an American parent's dream. And some talked about retirement. Rosa says, we're planning to get a house. And the house thing came up over and over again. It's our dream. I'd be planning it every year, but the problem is that when the refund money get home, you were so tied up that all I do is pay bills. But again, she's going to save next year's refund. And Pedro, her husband, says, we would like to get a house. In order to be a family, we would like a house. And then Rosa says, yeah, make some barbecue and get a swimming pool. So they have this whole vision of this lifestyle, they're aspiring to. And they're linking it explicitly to the refund. Okay, similar quote from Jacinta Estrada. She also wants to get a house. She's going to save her federal refund. She's read an article on AOL that if you're 26 right now and you have 0 saved, all you have to do is save $148 a month, and by the time you're 65, you'll be a millionaire. She can't do that, but she's going to do it with her refund. Okay. So what about the EITC may shape its meaning? First, it's contingent upon employment. And of course, employment in America is equivalent to citizenship. Second, it's delivered through the H&R Block, the same place every other American goes to get their taxes done, not the overseers of the public welfare. Third, its lump sum nature allows it to be seen as savings. And finally, it motivates work and activates feeling of social inclusion. Okay, so the question I want to leave you with is this work-based safety net, has it transformed the nature of the American welfare state? Let's think for a minute about the words of T.H. Marshall, the famous welfare scholar. He writes, "The shame which clung to poor relief expressed the deep feelings of people who understood that those who accepted relief must cross the road that separated the community of citizens from the outcast company of the destitute." So keep that in your mind. You could apply that wholesale, really, to the old AFTC need-based entitlement system in the United States. Now contrast that to this. We'll skip S.B. Anderson. This is an ad for H&R Block. Our people are your people. When you got Block, you got people. This phrase, I've got people, came up over and over again in interviews when people referred to using H&R Block. Why do you use H&R Block? Because I've got people. Okay, imagine. Do you have to cross the road for this program? Or does this program lend a hand across that road and bring you over to the other side? Now, this is Bill Clinton's signing welfare reform in 1996. This is also the year where the new EITC was fully implemented. The EITC is America's gift to the world. We invented it. It's wholly American. We've exported it to the rest of you. I think Australia has some tax credits, but not quite in this form. New Zealand has some. The UK has taken this up in a big way. But we argue that the move from need-based to work-based welfare has transformed the meaning of cash assistance in the U.S. However, 1.4 million families and 2.8 million children whose parents do not work or cannot work have completely fallen through our safety net and are currently living on incomes of less than $2 per person per day. That's the downer, and this is a policy brief I wrote with Luke Schaefer at Michigan, and that's the other side of what I'm looking at with regard to the changes in the American welfare system. Thanks.
I saw that Lorraine was running the time for Kathy, so maybe wonder who was chairing the session. But that was good. No, I figured that happened, so that was good. So we've got some time for questions and comments. Yeah.
Yes. The amount, one thing that Clinton really held out for, he ended up signing a Republican version of welfare reform, which he didn't really, wasn't his own vision, but he did he did make sure to get payback from the Republicans by getting a much bigger block grant for childcare. Having said that, the supply of childcare in the United States is far less than the demand, and childcare is not an entitlement. So in Massachusetts, the only way to get on the welfare, to get on the waiting list for subsidized childcare, basically, is to go on welfare, leave your job, and then you jump the queue. It's kind of a perverse set of incentives, but it's actually quite hard to get subsidized childcare, even though we've expanded the supply. Yeah, I think actual debt is a big downside of the EITC. I mean, the fact that you still can't live on your wages, which is something we wrote about in 1997 when we published Making Ends Meet, has not changed. So in some ways, nothing has changed and everything has changed. People are willing to work for that rainbow, right? But they're still not making ends meet in most months on their wages, and we document that in gory detail across our sample. So 25% of the refund goes to debt, and that's probably, I'll have to, someone needs to calculate this, but, some portion of that is just interest and late fees, and probably a fairly large portion. So we definitely want to figure out a way to fix the EITC. We're definitely not there yet with the credit. It needs to be tinkered with, and we need to figure out how to keep families from going into debt on a regular basis. However, this money for treats and nearly 40% of the credit that's going to mobility purposes, almost every family will say, I could never manage to do that. without the EIDC. They welcome the austerity that's required to save and build assets because they want some hope that there's a future. And it's quite amazing how they talk about their hopes and dreams with regard to the credit and with sort of the multi-year expectation that they're going to be able to save through the credit. And a small portion of our households had been doing that and actually did get mortgages for their own homes in the year that we observed them. So I think if we could get rid of the debt part, but preserve some of the forced savings part, I agree with you. Well, here's the great thing. In Massachusetts, everybody who goes to a non-profit tax preparation site has to fill out one of these surveys. We just used the survey that was being used in the city already, but we got the responses for our folks. If it were true, it still could be true, right? Because people who are going to H&R Block don't get this survey. If it were true that you could prime people in that way and 6 months later they would be behaving very differently, we would have the greatest social policy intervention in the history of the human race. So, it's interesting. I did this study along with the Fragile Families Child Well-Being Study where we picked a subsample of fragile families couples. These are couples that shared a non-marital birth in 2000 and followed them intensively, interviewing the couple about their relationship, observing them, how they related to each other. And we did have a lower breakup rate quite substantially than but that was 12 interviews that were about 3 hours long each over 4 years. So these are good questions, but probably not. Yeah.
Rebecca.
Yeah, some of it's probably going to treats. Some of it's probably going to asset and mobility purposes. We can't really tell, but yeah, we do acknowledge that there's all kinds of substitution going on here. It could just keep you from going into debt that month, right? If you're running a $700 deficit every month anyway, and you're spending $700 of your tax credit on your current expenses, then you don't go into debt that month. You see what I'm saying? So all of that is going on, absolutely.
Mara, and then Bill.
Right.
As long as the cutbacks are to policy is unconservative. For example, grandma who worked 50 years in search for pension, that's conservative. But when you can unemployment for students who only work for 2 years for the rest of it, it's fine to cut their program. It's not okay to cut occupational disability or pensions for certain aspects. And I think that's just a part of the broader social debate going on in the U.S. where it really fully attracts your work.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it's there's a big debate in the U.S. about how we're going to spend the scarce dollar. Are we going to spend it on the elderly or on children? And all the experts say you got to spend it on the kids. But the politics are such that you can't get there. The H&R Block has online a EIDC tax benefit calculator, which 2 of our respondents used like every month to but most people did not know how much they were going to get. And in fact, one of the reasons they were really scared, back when this study was done, 2007, 2008, you could actually choose to get the refund every month. We've eliminated that option now because nobody took it. But when we asked people, why aren't you doing this? They said, I'm so afraid, I don't know what I'm going to get, and I'm so afraid of owing money to the government. I mean, the IRS is seen as such a powerful force, that I don't want to do that. So they do and they don't. They have a pretty good sense that they're going to get something, but the rules are so complicated. They don't know how to sort of figure out the system all of that well. And that's kind of it's interesting. They still earmark. But they don't do as much pre-spend as you might think. Like if I knew I was going to get $5,000, we do this with our honorarium, as academics, I go out and buy a new suit because I'm going to get paid $5,000, for going to give this talk at X place. I don't actually get paid that much for talks, but let's just pretend that I do, okay?
That's good.
Yeah, Mark, I saw Mark over here going, wow. So, there's a little pre-spending at Christmas. I mean, everybody wants to buy their kids presents at Christmas, but there's not as much because of that uncertainty.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Kathy. I think that I'd like to ask you also, Kathy, that was wonderful. And, yeah. So we don't have $5,000, but we do have yet another bottle of wine.
Thank you.